Hi, welcome to Made in the Low Country. Today I'm going to be making a cushion cover for a pillow for my couch made from half square triangles. I'm going to be using my Go cutter to cut my half square triangles, but I will alternatively show you how to do it manually. This is the die that I'll be using. They're going to be 2-inch half square finished triangles, and it will look similar to this wall hanging that I have hanging on the wall in my sewing room. The first thing we need to do is measure the pillow so we know what size to make. My pillow measures 19 by 19, so I'll want to make my pillow cover top 19 and a half by 19 and a half. Run all these through, just be sure that you've got the cutting edge completely covered. Alright, let's see what we've got here. So right away you can see that some stuck to the mat, which is great. Just go ahead and pick them up. And as you can see, these half square triangles are already dog-eared, so you won't have a need to trim them once they're sewn together, which I love. So there's no marking or trimming with these, but you don't get 2 at a time, but I find it's a good trade-off. To make your half square triangles without using a Go cutter, all you'll need to do is cut. I'm cutting multiple fabrics at once. I do this all the time. You'll cut your squares 2 7/8 by 2 7/8 for a finished 2-inch half square triangle. So then you'll take your light and your dark fabric, and you'll want to draw a line from corner to corner on one of your pieces. I usually choose my light one. Then you'll sew a 1/4 inch seam on each side of the line. Alright, so I'm going to place the guide on the mark that I just drew, and then I'm just going to sew a 1/4 inch down each side of the line. So I know my needle, this is my 1/4 inch guide, so I know my needle is exactly a 1/4 inch away from that guide. Take it to the end, flip it around. Now, if you're doing yours this way, you'll want to chain piece them. Do each side of every one. To just quickly cut them with these little scissors. And there's your 2-inch finished square triangle. The first thing I want to do is lay out my first 4 squares the way I want them, because I'm going to be building this from the center out. So I'll go ahead and lay these out. Now if you've stitched yours together, like we did earlier, you would just go ahead and put your lights and your darks. You would need 4 of these, and you would put your lights toward the center and your darks toward the outside, and then sew those together. But I have to sew together my triangles and press them. So I'm going to use a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and I'm going to go sew these together and press them, and I'll be back. All right, so this is it with the next round. My half squares are sewn together. Now so far I've used the same light fabric for all of the rounds. I've done a light, a dark, a light and a dark, but this one is a little bit lighter than this one, and that's once again to give it that effect that I want. As I sew it together, you'll see what I mean. So now for this next round, I'm going to use the same fabric for my light, and I'm going to go back and repeat the center fabric here to make it really dark, and then I'm going to actually start using a little bit of a darker fabric for my light after this round. Okay. All right, I'm going to go sew this round together and clear off my table because it's kind of messy. Did you see it? I'm going to clear off my table and move this to the center, and I'll be back. Here it is, all the squares sewn together. Now I'm going to kind of change it up a little bit. So far I've used the same background, a light color background fabric, and now I'm going to go with a little bit of a darker fabric. I don't know if you can see that. I'm sorry if you cannot. And I'm also going to change, so far I've stayed kind of in the coral range, and I want a little bit of color to pop. So I'm going to also add a little bit of a turquoisey blue color. Okay, so I'll just start laying these. The pillow, the cushion cover needs to be 10 squares by 10 squares across, 10 squares up, and by 10 squares across. So I have my 10 squares going up. So after I sew this round together, the next step will be to fill in these sides to make it square. Now we're just going to fill in these sides until we get a square. We're just going to repeat that same process that we did in the last round. Closing in these sides. Right, and for the final one, I think I'm just going to use the center, which I've used again in here. So this will be the third time I've used the center square. The center square fabric, that is. All right. So I'm going to do the other side, and then I'm going to sew these together, and then we'll start building it, sewing it row by row. We have a square, so it's time to start assembling the rows. Now you can do this several different ways. You can sew the four in the center together, sew these and go this way, which is probably the way I'm going to do it. I have in the past just sewn it row by row, but I like to keep my fours together, and that's just the way I like to do it. So do it however you're comfortable. You're going to use a 1/4 inch seam allowance, get it constructed, and then we'll talk about quilting. Now that we've finished sewing it all together, it's time to prepare our piece for quilting. So here I've just got a piece of scrap batting and a scrap backing, and I'm going to use 505 quilt spray. I like to spray the batting and not the actual fabric. Just to give it a quick light spray. This is a really small piece, so it doesn't need a lot. And smooth everything nice and neat. We don't want any puckers or tucks. I do the front and the back. For this project, I'm going to be using Bernina's number 10D foot, which is a foot that's made for stitching in the ditch or edge stitching. So I'm going to run that guide on the foot right in the ditch, but I'm going to move my needle over about 3 places and stitch in all of the background fabric squares. I'm going to go all the way around. Now we'll be quilting over the darker fabric in the corners, so you'll want a thread that coordinates with everything. My quilting is done, and here is a close-up. So here you can see how forgiving this method is. If I had tried to stitch in the ditch and go over these bulky corners, my needle most likely would have popped out of the ditch and you would have seen the stitches. This way is so much more forgiving. Now it's time to square up the cushion cover top. My pillow is again 19 inches, so I need to cut my cushion cover to 19.5 by 19.5. For your envelope style back, you're going to need to cut 2 pieces. So to figure out the length that we need to cut, you'll start with the size of your pillow length and divide by 2. Then you'll add 5, and then you'll add 0.5 for the 1/2 inch seam allowance. So my cushion backs, my 2 pieces are going to need to be 15 inches long by the width of my pillow front, which is 19.5 inches. With this fabric, it doesn't really matter which way I cut it, because it's non-directional, but it's real important if you have directional fabric to do that correctly. Next, you're going to press one long edge, so a 19.5 inch edge in my case. You're going to turn it under a 1/4 inch and press, and then you're going to turn it under a 1/4 inch again and press again. This is so we have a nice finished edge on our envelope back of our pillow. Once you get them pressed, we're going to top stitch them. Using that same foot with the guide, I just run the guide along the edge and I move my needle over 2 places to the right and I stitch down that edge. I just chain piece both of them. It's time to put our front and back pieces together. Lining up your raw edges with the edge that you just sewed facing down, you'll lay it down first and then take your other back piece and line up the raw edges, and with the edge that we just sewed, place it facing up. Next, you can either pin or clip the edges to hold everything together while sewing. You can either use a serger to serge the edges together or do like I'm going to do. I'm just going to use my sewing machine and use a zigzag stitch. I widened and stretched my zigzag stitch just a little, and I'm slowly going around making sure that all of my raw edges are lined up. Continue sewing all the way around, finishing where you began. Turn your cover right side out and using a chopstick, push out all 4 of your corners. The last thing I like to do is top stitch the top of the pillow. I do this to keep the back in place. Top stitching just holds everything where it should be. As I'm stitching, I use my fingers to be sure the back is pushed around to the back. I don't mind if a little of the front rolls to the back, but I definitely don't want the back rolling to the front. I'm using that same foot with the guide, running the guide along the edge of the pillow top, and I've moved my needle all the way over as far as it will go to the left. If you have questions about any part of this process, please leave them below and I'll be happy to answer. We're done. The quilting really adds to the dramatic effect of the design. Here's the top stitching to make sure that the back doesn't roll to the front, and the finished edge of the envelope, which is very wide so you don't see any pillow peeking through. And here it is on my couch. Thanks for watching. See you next time.